Now, many Americans viewed September 11th as a complete, horrifying, unprecedented terrorist attack on US soil. The reality was that September 11th capped off a series of smaller terrorist events throughout the 1990s. So this did not happen out of nowhere, even though most Americans were not paying attention to the early warning signs. So when we look at the 1990s, we see a pattern of escalating terrorism against the United States, but mostly taking place overseas. Part of this terrorism was a pushback over American military actions in the Middle East during the Gulf War, and with the United States continually siding with Israel over the issue of Israel and Palestine. And there's growing concern over the stationing of troops in the Middle East as well. The World Trade Center bombing in 1993 was the first attempted attack on the World Trade Center buildings in New York City. 6 people died. It was a fairly minimal physical damage. And overseas installations of the United States were also continually threatened with terrorism. In 1998, twin bombings at the Kenya and Tanzanian American embassies resulted in 200 people dying, mostly African citizens of Kenya and Tanzania who worked at the embassy. So the idea of violence being used to target the United States was not something that was new or unique to September 11th. But to talk about the origins of the September 11th attack itself, we have to rewind and revisit an earlier period of US history. Remember, in the 1980s, the United States was indirectly involved in Afghanistan. We talked about this earlier this semester during the Reagan era that the Soviets fought their own very long war in Afghanistan, trying to prop up a pro-Soviet government against a Islamic fundamentalist uh, insurgency. And that the United States, because of the Cold War, decided that they would help the insurgency by giving them aid money, military materials, and military training. By the end of the 1980s, that insurgency became known as the Taliban. They took over control of Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, a terrorist group by the name of the Taliban, or excuse me, not the Taliban, Al Qaeda, comes into existence in 1988. Al Qaeda had initially been born to coordinate resistance to the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. But following the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, the leader of Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, will shift his focus to targeting the United States. So, as a anti-Soviet fighter on the ground in Afghanistan in the 1980s, Osama bin Laden was a CIA-supported ally fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. However, he was not happy with the American allies. In particular, the increased US military presence in Saudi Arabia, which is where Osama bin Laden was from, enraged him, in part because Saudi Arabia is home to the two holiest sites in the religion of Islam, Mecca and Medina. And there's also this pushback against American culture. As in the 1990s, as we mentioned, the United States was increasingly diverse and embracing this concept of religious pluralism. We talked about changing attitudes about family and sex. And for bin Laden and other Islamic fundamentalists, this seemed to be just the height of immorality. So the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan following Soviet withdrawal in 1989 meant that bin Laden had a friendly government in which to locate Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. And on September 11th, 2001, Al Qaeda staged a coordinated attack on American soil. Pilots who were Al Qaeda agents and had trained in the United States hijacked 4 planes. 2 of these planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. 1 plane flew into the Pentagon. And the 4th plane, which was also meant to target Washington, D.C., ended up crashing in a field in Pennsylvania after passengers overpowered the hijackers and brought down the plane. The human toll of 9/11 included about 3,000 people. Of that number, 400 first responders were killed, largely when the Twin Towers collapsed while people were responding to the emergency. And Americans were horrified. This was one of those times in history in which people formed what scholars call flashbulb memories. In other words, people can, if they were alive in 2001 and not really, really little, they can generally tell you where they were when they found out the news about the September 11th terrorist attacks. I'm going to date myself here, but I was actually a freshman in college. It was my very first semester. I was getting ready for my English class. I was sitting in the hallway outside the classroom. Kind of vaguely noticed a lot of people downstairs congregating by a TV, was busy studying because I was a giant nerd, and then went into my English class. And my English professor came into the classroom and told us that the college had canceled classes that day because of the September 11th attack. And then I went out to the hallway and I went out just in time and paid attention to the TV downstairs to see footage of the Pentagon where the plane had just crashed into it. So everybody who was alive during September 11th has similar stories to tell of where they were when they heard the news and how they felt and how they responded.